I want to begin by discussing a little bit more about the Green Leaf Forward and the connection that it has to motherism and this new era of Black consciousness that we're ultimately experiencing. So, in our last few videos, we talked about how we could ultimately begin to mitigate the effects of climate change and climate crisis by, by essentially updating our society in order to live in tandem with the Anthropocene as we begin to understand this concept of motherism. So, from a motherist perspective, just to recap and reiterate, that motherism is about giving people a place to be, that God grew a garden, right? He landed, touched earth, grew a garden, and placed Adam and Eve in the garden, giving them a place to be and to live in harmony with nature. That we as Black people, as a collective, can begin to do that for the community, especially the lower income uh, Black people who live within the hood, right? That we get to begin to formulate, or rather create, housing cooperatives that will ultimately begin to challenge gentrification, that Black reparations doesn't have to come in the form of a check, that Black reparations can be uh, getting Black people involved in vocation and trades where they actually go around the community and then just begin to rebuild the community. That we can then begin to invest in Black businesses and create more shops and create more opportunities for Black people locally. And when you think about what this means in terms of food and what this means in terms of housing and things like that, that we would ultimately have healthier foods, we would have more local and organic food, that there is, a system that we can create where we as a people, as a collective, can then begin to function as a community. So there are Hebrew Israelites, and within their belief system, they understand how there is a parallel between the Israelites and the oppression that they experienced in the land of Egypt. And what I would then articulate is that from an archetypal perspective, God drove the Israelites out of the land of Egypt to do what? To give them the promised land. That the green leaf forward for Black people could be that archetypal promised land, that we could do it differently, that we could rebuild the hood, that we could rebuild these low income communities, providing a place for all Black people to be. So, what you could then say is that climate reparations is Black reparations, is reparations for all. Because then we could ultimately do that for not just Black people, this is something that could be done for other low income communities so people can preserve uh, their communities and not be subject to gentrification. The Anthropocene and the climate crisis presents us a really interesting opportunity as a collective of Black people. And interestingly enough, it echoes something that Martin Luther King had discussed in his book, Where Do We Go From Here, in 1967, where he talked about how one of the ways to begin to challenge, uh, to to help Black people was to ultimately create a guaranteed income. He says, I am now convinced that the simplest approach will prove to be most effective. The solution to poverty is to abolish it directly by a now widely discussed measure, the guaranteed income. So he understood fundamentally that what kept Black people structured at the bottom and poor was the fact that we are coming out of this system of racialized capitalism, of racism and segregation, and how it was a form of racial capitalism. And so that in order to then benefit the community, that we would need a universal income that would ultimately help to sustain and maintain the community and keep it intact. Motherism and the Green Leaf Forward could be that future. That is a future that we can then begin to envision for our people. That climate reparations is Black reparations, is reparations for all.